All right, continuing with discussion of social relationships. Previously, I defined and differentiated prejudice and discrimination. And in this video, I'm going to talk about stereotype, which stereotypes are often described or discussed in conjunction with prejudice and discrimination. Now, a stereotype is a type of heuristic. Now, if you remember from previous videos, you might remember that a heuristic is a mental shortcut. It's something that makes thinking or decision making easier in some way, something that simplifies our complex world. And so sometimes you simplify the complexity of humanity and all the groups it contains by making generalizations about other groups of people. All right, so a generalization where you make a group of people seem more similar, more uniform than they actually are. You know, everybody in that group acts this way. That's the sort of thing you see with a stereotype. And so it involves general attitudes and beliefs about a group of people. And importantly, it is a generalization. It is the idea that an entire group of people acts a certain way or possesses certain characteristics, and stereotypes can lead to prejudice. If your stereotypes include undesirable qualities of that group, that can lead to negative attitudes about that group, which can then lead to discrimination against that group. And stereotypes can be about negative qualities or positive qualities. You can have a stereotype like, hey, everybody in that group is super intelligent. You can have stereotypes that have negative qualities. Everybody in that group is lazy. All right. The thing is, even when stereotypes involve desirable qualities being assumed about a particular group, they can still cause harm. All right. The thing about stereotypes is, since they are a generalization, they are at least sometimes going to be wrong. Any heuristic has the potential for leading you to errors in judgment. Previously, we talked about things like the availability heuristic. Whatever comes to mind easiest is what you use in your decision making. Well, that might not be the most relevant or important thing for you to consider. It was just the thing that was easiest for you to come up with. Well, with stereotypes, this can lead to errors in judgment when you encounter somebody who doesn't meet the stereotype. And depending on what your stereotype is, it may be more or less likely that you're going to be wrong in an individual situation about an individual person. So I'm going to give you one example. A lot of people have the stereotype that Asian students are either more intelligent or more likely to get good grades. And so some people will say, well, what's the harm in that? You're assuming something good about people. Well, what if you got a student who is struggling and they don't meet your stereotype? You're making faulty assumptions about them. You also might completely just disregard anything about their individual situation because you rely on their stereotype. If they are struggling in a class, you might assume, well, they must not be trying hard because clearly they're supposed to be brilliant. You can make faulty assumptions. Somebody's not going to live up to that stereotype. You know, some people also have stereotypes about black individuals being better at sports. And some people will say, well, what's the harm in that? That's a good thing. But what about the person who doesn't meet that stereotype? Then you're going to lead to errors. You're going to lead to incorrect assumptions. You might make that person feel uncomfortable when you show that you're assuming things about them. All right, so stereotypes don't have to assume undesirable qualities in a group of people to cause harm or at least lead to errors in some way. Now, another thing that can happen with stereotypes is people who are members of a group that there are known stereotypes about, they can experience something called stereotype threat. Now, all right, I had people coming in my door and then I got an error message that my camera was overheating. So I'm trying again to talk about stereotype threat. All right, so we define stereotype. That's that generalization about a group of people. Stereotype threat occurs when a person who's a member of a group where there are known stereotypes perceives themselves as being sort of on stage to represent their group in certain situations. It's the threat is you worry that you are going to verify the stereotype in some way. There are various examples that I could give, but the one that I think of is, I am not a thin person. And sometimes when I point that out, somebody has to come into the comments and elaborate on that further. Folks, come on. And so there are stereotypes about larger people, fat people. Fat's just a word, folks. I'm not insulting myself. It's just a descriptor. But there are stereotypes. People might think that, just fat people just eat whatever they want, or that they are lazy, or, insert anything you've ever heard here. And so maybe if I'm in a group meal situation, the stereotype threat might come in where I'm like, okay, so people have negative stereotypes about people my size. They might be watching what I'm eating. If we have the opportunity to, go on a hike or something, maybe they'll be watching me like, oh, can she even handle this? Is she going to make an excuse to try to get out of it? It can kind of make me nervous, and it can negatively impact my performance. I might do worse, or I might behave differently than I normally would because I am made to feel anxious because of the stereotype, what I know people might be expecting of me. So that's an experience. Let's go ahead and do the book definition. An experience where a person has the knowledge that they must work against an existing stereotype. They have to prove themselves. They have to make their group look good. They have to represent the group favorably. Often includes an awareness of the risk of confirming the negative stereotype as a result of the outcome of the situation. All right, we've also seen evidence or discussion of stereotype threat in terms of like testing situations. You might be in a situation where maybe you have a big math test, or a test to get into a school for people who are gifted in math and science, getting a scholarship or something like that. And you may be aware that there are stereotypes that boys or men are better in math and science than girls and women, right? And I'm not saying that's true. That is a stereotype. Stereotypes can never be true or completely true because somebody's not going to fit the stereotype. It's a generalization. It's a sweeping generalization. And so someone who is a girl or a woman taking one of these, like a math or science test, they might feel particularly anxious about their performance. They are worried that they are going to confirm, if they do poorly on this test, they are going to confirm the stereotype that their group is not good at math. We also see this in academic testing situations, all right, when we look at racial minorities, right, where they know that there are stereotypes, that they are not as bright as the racial majority students, the white students. And again, I always have to remind, because sometimes students, they take it the wrong way because these are emotionally charged issues. These are not correct assumptions, but they are assumptions that exist. And so the awareness makes them more nervous, and it can make them perform worse because they feel so much pressure to refute the myth, to disprove the stereotype. All right, so stereotype threat has to do with your awareness that there are expectations, there are stereotypes about your particular group, that people are expecting you to look bad, to perform badly in some way, or perform in some way that verifies the stereotype. It puts you on edge. It makes you feel like you're forever performing to try to not let your group down. All right, so that's your basic idea behind stereotype threat. This is also, I've heard students say how this is also discussed further in some education courses taught on campus, and also sociology courses, and certainly in social psychology. All right, now, some other things about stereotypes, some other definitional stuff to differentiate is stereotypes can be explicit or implicit. Explicit means it's out in the open. The person is consciously aware of their stereotype. They can describe it freely. Whereas many of us hold implicit stereotypes. Implicit is more hidden, more subtle. You don't have access to it. You may not even be aware that you hold a particular stereotype if it's an implicit stereotype. Now, that makes things tricky because if we want to do research on something that's implicit, how do we measure it? How do we test it? If something's an explicit stereotype, you can ask somebody, do you believe this about this group of people? And they'll be like, yes, I do. If something's implicit, they might answer, well, no, I don't. Because they don't even realize that they hold that stereotype. They don't even realize that stereotype is affecting their behaviors, affecting their beliefs. So researchers have come up with something called the implicit attitudes test. It is a bit controversial in terms of trying to figure out if it has validity for testing, for measuring exactly what it's supposed to measure. I am aware that there is some controversy. I don't use this in my own research. I'm getting this secondhand, but I am aware that there is some controversy. But the development of this test reflects this basic desire to measure things that measure stereotypes that are implicit, that people may not own up to because they may not even be aware that they harbor these stereotypes. All right, so we've talked about stereotypes and stereotype threat and two types of stereotypes. And then in the next video, we're going to talk about some of the things that can lead to the development of prejudice and stereotypes.